6.12, 1 p.m. item, presentation on California Department of Fish and Wildlife's Clear Lake Hitch Barriers Removal Project. And this is brought to us by Water Resources, and I'll turn it over to our Deputy Director.
Thank you so much. So I do have our program coordinator, Mitchell Breedlove, who will be sharing his screen. He should have the capacity to do so. So as Chair Paiska said, my name is Marina Della Janis. I go by she, her pronouns. I serve as the Deputy Director at the Lake County Water Resources Department. I am joined, very excited to be joined by some of our friends from the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. And we will be giving an update on our California Department of Fish and Wildlife's Clear Lake Hitch Barriers Removal Project. Next slide, please. Great, okay, well, I will turn.
Move your stuff around.
Minor technical difficulties, just one moment. Good? All right, thank you so much. Thanks, Jake. All right, so today's discussion, we have a lot of fun information to share with you all. So I'm going to do a brief overview starting out by our overview of our Lake County Watershed Protection District, and then we're going to outline how we got here. So why are we here today? Why are we bringing this presentation forward? And then I'm going to pass it over to the experts from California Department of Fish and Wildlife, CDFW, to do an overview of the CHI, the Clear Lake Hitch. They're going to highlight their spawning and migration challenges that they've recently encountered, recent efforts, and how we are working towards overcoming some of those challenges. We're going to highlight the permit overview process from CDFW, and then we're going to share an exciting opportunity to bring more questions, how you can get involved in the work that's being done for a town hall. And then, of course, we love to close it out with Q&A. Next slide, please. All right, so just highlighting, as you all are familiar with, but who doesn't love to hear about the work that we are doing at the Lake County Watershed Protection District. So next, perfect, thank you, Mitchell. So our Lake County Watershed Protection District and Water Resources Department, we're tasked with the protection and preservation of Clear Lake, including all waters, so surface water and groundwater. So we aim to promote an environmentally and economically sustainable watershed, and we do this by hosting many programs and projects, including aids to navigation on Clear Lake, aquatic plant management, groundwater monitoring, flood management, stormwater management, surface water quality monitoring, all sorts of fun things. Next slide, please. So how are we involved with the work and the projects that you'll be hearing about here momentarily? So we have been working very closely with our friends from CDFW to get this ball rolling on the project and the work that they will be sharing. So we have been working with them to sending out rights of entries, as we've discussed in the past. A lot of the creeks lie on private property, so we need to get approval and the okay from these landowners that have these properties that fall into the creek. So we've been sending out rights of entries, having those conversations with the local community members and being that local face, and then of course putting them in contact with CDFW. We've been helping with some of the actual brush removal. So once this vegetation is downed, where does it go from there? We've been helping with some of that retrieval and obtaining, and then of course public outreach. We also have a few projects that do tie in closely with the work that we will be talking to you about. One specifically is our Middle Creek Restoration Project, which has been a long-standing project. Lots of exciting work. We are currently in the parcel acquisition phase, but long-term plan is to reclaim those levees in the Upper Lake area and restore that area back to wetland, which is perfect habitat for our Clear Lake Hitch friends. We also have a Clover Creek Restoration and Rehabilitation Project, and we are working actively with funds from Caltrans to restore a portion of the Clover Creek Diversion Channel to its original state. So all these go in tandem with the work that is being done. Next slide, please. All right. Oh, perfect. So how did we get here? Just a quick overview, and this is not new information. It shouldn't be new information. If it is new information, you want to get sped up, please feel free to come see me on the third floor or give our department a call. More than happy to get you up to speed. But as we are well aware, the Clear Lake Hitch was listed threatened in California under the California Endangered Species Act. CDFW lake and streambed alteration regulations were introduced, and Lake County supervisors voted to unanimously declare an emergency for Clear Lake Hitch this past year. And then we were recently presented draft regulations from the State Water Resources Control Board. They have some public meetings that will be taking place on the 19th of this month and then the following week as well. Regarding those, they are soliciting public comments. And then, of course, as we know, storms cause debris in our channels. So on that note, I'm going to go ahead and ask Mitchell to go to the next slide. And I'm going to pass it over to Felipe Leluz with CDFW to do an overview of the CHI.
Okay, thank you, Marina. And I want to, of course, thank the board for having us in hearing this item. And Marina already provided my introduction. I'm Felipe Leluz with CDFW. And we can go on to the next slide, please. Some of this is review, especially for the board members, but I do like to go over and give a species overview. Clear Lake hitch is a subspecies of the Sacramento hitch endemic to Clear Lake, or to Lake County. We've heard multiple times of the cultural importance, not only as an important food source, but as a cultural touchstone for the indigenous peoples of the region. And also, it's ecologically important. As well as being an important food item for people, it's an important food item for many other animals in the region. And we don't really talk about the nutrient transport or other roles, ecological roles that the hitch play. We look at native fish as a bioindicator, and in that the trends that we see in the populations reflect the function of the watershed and habitat that surround it. So we've been watching this species decline, and that does raise some concerns as to some of the functions that the ecosystem and the watershed surrounding the region, the processes have been disrupted. It has a 5 to 6 year lifespan, and I call this out because we are seeing prolonged periods of drought. California is a boom and bust ecology, and these fish are adapted to that. They're adapted to have big responses in wet years when conditions are good, and hopefully those boom years can get us through the lean years during drought when recruitment is low. All life stages of this fish use the tributaries around Clear Lake, and all of the locals know they see the fish in the streams. And this time frame goes from February through June, when the adults move into the tributaries in early spring, when there's water. They deposit eggs. Those eggs hatch and rear, and the juveniles can actually stay within the tributaries for quite some time, as long as there's water present and conditions are conducive. Some of our partners, our scientific partners in Robinson Rancheria, are still monitoring isolated pools where hitch are still present, and that's pretty rare for this time of year. Normally the streams would be dry by now. And as Marina mentioned, this species was listed under the California Endangered Species Act in 2014, and here we are almost 10 years later, and the species is still in decline. Next slide, please. So there are numerous factors contributing to the decline. We're here specifically to talk about migration and spawning challenges and how we're overcoming some of that. We believe that, poor juvenile recruitment is a big component of the decline. And in order for these fish to successfully spawn, they need access to these tributaries. The 2014 status review estimated that 92% of their spawning habitat had been lost to barriers. And these barriers, some of which are obvious, there are permanent barriers such as dams. We can all picture, Grand Coulee or other large dams. Some are less obvious, and this picture on the far right is a small fish ladder that we installed in Manning Creek on private property. The property owner reached out to us and mentioned this barrier, and we installed this small fish ladder. And this is only about 2 feet high. These are not salmon; they're not strong jumpers. So small barriers like this can prevent their movement. This allowed them to move up to the next property on Manning Creek, where that property owner reached out to us, and we actually removed a road on Manning Creek where they're going to install a bridge to allow hitch to access the entirety of Manning Creek. Some of the other barriers are flow related. This picture in the middle is Adobe Creek in March, which is when we would expect hitch to be moving up and spawning, and you can see here that it's dry. So that's another flow related barrier that leads to desiccation and stranding. And then Jennifer will talk about some of the smaller barriers that we're addressing specifically. Next slide, please. And so I just want to give an overview of some of the recent efforts. There is a lot going on, so this is very broad. But this is what collaboration looks like. Here we have representatives from 3 tribal governments, California Department of Fish and Wildlife, State Water Resources Control Board, and Water Resources Department at Kelsey Road, at the Kelsey Creek Bridge, which is a major barrier. For those of you who have been tracking this effort, August of 2022, the department underwent a government-to-government consultation with tribal governments in the region. That led to the formation of a multi-agency task force, which really got us out of our silos and really stimulated the conversations and a lot of collaboration between the agencies. We then finished up the year with an emergency summit, which was a government meeting of agencies and tribes to really communicate to our agency leadership what we need and what directions we want to go. We are planning a follow-up summit for the end of November. Again, a management summit. In 2023, so much has come out of this, and it's really ballooned the efforts. So we're building on existing efforts. So the tribes have done monitoring. We're continuing our monitoring as the department. And building, working with DWR and State Water Resources Control Board to improve monitoring. We're coordinating a lot better and communicating a lot better with agencies and working better on communicating with the public and private industry and reviving projects. Marina had mentioned the Middle Creek Restoration Project, so Army Corps of Engineers back at the table, and we're hoping to move forward with that. And then some new efforts are, again, improved outreach. Which is really why we're here, is we want to, educate property owners specifically today on what they can do with and without a permit, and facilitate barrier removal to allow these fish to move up into the watersheds. And with that, I'll hand it over to Jennifer.
Thank you. All right. Good afternoon. Everybody hear me okay? Jennifer Garcia. I'm an environmental program manager with CDFW out of our North Central region. And as Felipe had mentioned, we have been a large part of a task force and an implementation team that's kind of a multi-agency tribal community partnership. Both task forces complement one another, but the main goal is obviously to work together to improve habitat for Clear Lake Hitch. One of the biggest issues that we've had, and Felipe mentioned this, is barriers. Some of them are infrastructure, so they're going to be dams and culverts, actual hardscape. The other is vegetation, and then debris, which has become trapped within that vegetation. And that has led to a multitude of issues, I think, throughout the county, much of which I'm sure you've heard from the community in terms of flooding and things of that nature, but also from the migratory standpoint and access to spawning grounds for Hitch. It's impaired their ability to move through the density of vegetation and actually get to areas where they need to get to. So that became one part of this very big plan, was vegetation burial removal, which moves a little bit faster, not a lot faster, but a little bit faster than the large kind of construction and planning that comes with infrastructure changes, like removing roads and changing culverts. So this is the project that we took on. Next slide, please. So during one of these meetings in our task force, Geneva Thompson, who you might be familiar with, of the California Natural Resources Agency, referred us to the California Conservation Corps. They've been doing a variety of veg work, obviously for years and years throughout California. But she mentioned that there were 2 crews that might be available to come and assist us with on-the-ground vegetation removal in these actual creeks, which is tremendous for us because we don't have that capacity, either as the county or as agencies. So we were able to work with the Cs, they're leaders in minimal disturbance, but high impact vegetation reduction efforts. And we spent an entire day, a very intensive entire day in the field looking at various sites that we prioritized kind of throughout the Big Valley and Upper Lake area initially. And we were able to work with them to make a spike, which is a week-long, literally 7 days on the ground, very intensive, concerted effort just in the Big Valley area. We were able to get right of entries from, thankfully, from the county. Not as many as we'd liked, but we did. But we also worked with California State Parks, who provided camping and hot showers for our crew, which was wonderful. So next slide, please. So the goal, increase Clear Lake Hitch migration corridors, improve access to spawning habitat, reduce fish stranding, and clearing this dense vegetation and the debris from our various tributaries. Also, as you can see, we had a lot of garbage removed in the 7 days that we were in these creeks. So again, outreach opportunity for sure. The goal was actually not to address flooding hazards. I think a lot of folks in the community initially thought that the crews in the creek were actually removing flood hazards because of all the flooding that we'd endured. And actually, what we were doing is really just removing that really dense vegetation in the actual channel, in addition to debris and garbage that would allow for fish passage. We did leave a lot of structure for shade, which is increasingly important as we get climate change coming through and heating days and heating water. So you'll notice that the creeks are very clear in that sense, but there's still a good amount of vegetation on the side providing that kind of shade habitat. Of course, removal of this debris and this vegetation has helped with flooding tremendously. And I think my goal is that we will continue this effort of vegetation removal throughout this Clear Lake watershed in phases. And still, we are then working on the higher level barrier removals. And those just take, as I said, a little bit more engineering. Next slide, please. So with this, I wanted to first state that the lower right-hand side is the list of barriers that we as a group have collectively found or know of. The list seems to grow virtually monthly at this point. And again, those are all barriers, both structural and vegetation. And they are prioritized based on the ability for fish to maneuver them. Some structures, the fish literally cannot get past if we don't have almost flood conditions, simply because that structure is so high. And as Felipe mentioned, Hitch don't jump. So the others are vegetation, and we are starting to very quickly move through that vegetation barrier list, thanks in part to property owners who were willing to allow us to have access behind their homes and some even through their property in order to get to the vegetation, trim it, and bring it up. And that was probably the hardest part for all of us, is simply being able to find a place to put the vegetation. It's immense. So I wanted to also mention that we were really fortunate that on one of the days in particular, we had so much vegetation that we couldn't fit in any of the trailers that Scott reached out to PG&E, who reached out to Atlas Tree, who provided us a crew and a chipper truck for a few hours on 2 separate days. And without their help, we'd have never gotten this done. And the trees would still be sitting there on the banks, probably falling back into the creek. So a huge thank you to them for all of their support. Definitely helped us to realize that we needed to have a chipper truck available all the time for these efforts.
Jennifer,
Yeah.
on this map, it's hard for us to see.
Yes.
Can you explain what the areas are?
Yep. So the upper right-hand side is a map of the properties for which we requested right of entries. And they are adjacent to McGaw Slough, Adobe Creek, Bell Hill Road. What am I missing? I think there's another slide that's missing that actually has Bell Hill Road and Coal Creek. So that's pretty much what you're looking at. The colors were simply work areas, so that the CCC crew knew which areas they were working at any given day, based on access through those properties. Not all of the highlighted properties that are on there signed ROEs, but that is the bulk of them. We sent, as you can see, 38 ROEs, 18 people responded, property owners responded. So we were able to get in and do very intense vegetation work, of which I'll show you some pictures in just a moment.
Is that blue one? Is that the Coal Creek area?
No, that's actually on a different slide that is not on here.
Okay.
Bell Hill Road is also not on there.
Okay.
Yeah, it's nice and tiny. It's hard to see, I realize. But that's typically how, once we've received approvals, we like to kind of map it out in different work areas so we all stay on task. Make sure I'm not forgetting anything. Next slide, please. So phase one, just wanted to show some great before and after photos of what we were able to accomplish in the field with the SEAS crew for just 1 week. So here we have Adobe Creek at Finley Road. Many of you, I'm sure, have been either by this site or have had community members likely address some flooding issues. The vegetation was absolutely, frankly, insane. I don't think I've ever physically cut as much vegetation in my entire life and seen it all up on the banks of the creek. That said, what a difference that it's made. This area is right behind houses that are, I think, is it Harris? Mm-hmm. Harris Road or Harris Street. And this section, although not terribly long, but extremely important to accessing upper levels of Adobe Creek and also for reducing some of the flood risk in that area. Next slide, please. This is Magoslu at Finley Road, so just down the road. This area, we probably should have added more pictures. The amount of trash that was removed from this site directly under the bridge was 2 to 3 trailer loads in and of itself. In addition, as you can see on the left, we have an immense amount of vegetation that's been cut and left in the creek, and or vegetation that's simply just fallen across the creek, as it does in storms and the like. So cleaning all of that out took quite some time. In addition, on this side on the right, you'll see that there's a bit of a trench in the middle. We actually needed to remove some of the sediment that was there because that wall was so high that the next time water comes through, it would simply back up again and cause a large pooling area. So we worked with the crews to do a small trench so that that water will continue to move through this system. Hopefully over time, it will also open up a bit and allow additional fish passage. Next slide, please. Bell Hill Road. This site, as you can see, the 2 lower culverts are used by Hitch for migration. The area that is upstream of Bell Hill Road is extremely high quality spawning habitat and spawning gravels. So to remove the density of willow and blackberry in that area was tremendously helpful. Sadly, we actually found 6 or 7 hitch that had become entangled. And died, I think, trying to get out of the area. So this is an area where we've had many, many fish strandings simply because the water is absorbed or it's blocked and they can make their way back through. Next slide, please. And then Coal Creek along Clark Road. We are still working on this site. We were able to make it through about 3/4 of the vegetation and the debris and the garbage that was laden within Coal Creek. This also had caused flooding issues upstream where the water would back up to a point where it would leave the creek channel and we would have fish literally on Clark Road and in people's farms and their fields. So we're trying to keep these areas again clear, but also that water maintaining its channel course so that the fish aren't confused and exiting the actual water course. So we will be returning. Again, this was phase 1.
Was this the north part of the creek or out in that Army Corps slough area?
It's, hopefully I get this right. This is the area that would be between Soda Bay Road and the crossing at the first crossing at Clark Road. And there's that
Oh, yeah.
kind of
That was a really bad-
veers off to the east and then back straight. The Army Corps has a number of straight sections
Right.
that they implemented, and then the old Coal Creek, which we did not get into, but we are working with property owners in that area. They have dealt with some flooding, and they're looking at a restoration project, so hopefully we can get some grant funds out to them. So one of the areas that is still needing to, I think, not necessarily this level of intensity, but more outreach with property owners is just pulling out vegetation that's either been thrown in there or that has washed down due to flood-related issues, but nowhere near this level of intensity that you see on the left, which took almost 2 days to remove. And like I said, we still have probably 1 more day just because of that density of vegetation in the creek. Next slide, please. So what's next and how to help? What's next is still working with the CCCs. Yeah, next slide. Thanks, Mitchell. Working with the CCCs to return. We still have work to do in Coal Creek. We never had the chance to get to the more lakeside area of McGaw Slough. We have both actually a property owner, I'm thrilled for this, that owns adjacent property to both McGaw Slough and Adobe Creek. So that will be really helpful for us to be able to still get in there, do some veg removal. Then we will be moving up to Upper Lake, and we have a number of projects that will be implemented with Clover Creek and Middle Creek. The Cs also have a contract with the Department of Water Resources, so that's been a tremendous funding boost for us as well. And now it's just more a matter of finding time for the Cs to be able to join us, because they put us on their calendar after already having an entire year's worth of work to do. So we're very happy they were able to accommodate us, and we're hoping they'll be able to do so again before we get into the wet season. And then, of course, Scotts Creek. I literally, before this meeting, finally had the chance to get up to Scotts Valley area and follow Scotts Creek up to South Cow Mountain, just to get a sense of what's going on out there, and it's pretty much the same as it is everywhere else. So it's more a matter of being able to find some times to get in there with property owners and work with them and start removing again some of the debris that's piled up through the years. The main acknowledgement is that we really can only do this without willing landowners, because we don't have any other way to get into the creek and pull this material out. So we're hopeful that this first phase and future outreach will really assist the community in coming forth and letting us get into pretty much the creek adjacent to their property and do some clearing. And then in addition, we're hoping that folks will be able to either assist us with setting up burn piles, or having us come in with a chipper truck, or being able to use some form of, removal, maybe with one of your, what am I trying to say? Trailers. Yeah, your trailers. So anyway, we will see. Much more to come in the next few months. And then, as Marina mentioned, we have a webinar outreach meeting, I think the 11th of October. We were going back and forth on dates. So hoping to work directly with community members and answer some questions. Next slide, please. Some of the big questions that we always ask: when is a permit from DFW necessary? And the short and somewhat simple answer is anytime you're going to be altering the bedbank or channel of a creek. So actually digging, dredging, removing material, adding material, bridges, culverts, retaining walls, water diversion pumps and wells actually in the creek, piers, boat docks, this is for the lake as well. All of those things are typically something we would recommend notifying or receiving a lake or streambed alteration agreement for. Same thing with removing vegetation, but it's more in the root structure form. So if you're going to be in a creek and you're actually removing a huge root ball or something of that nature, those are the times you would want to consult with DFW, because in theory, it can actually very much structurally change the flow of the water and the stability of that channel. So next slide, please. When do you typically not need a permit? Cutting or trimming overgrown vegetation that reaches out into the creek channel. Our main concern is keeping that shade stability for our aquatic species. But as you can see, the density of the vegetation that's in the actual creek channel, if you're able to remove that by hand, same thing with the debris down below, and you don't need heavy equipment, you don't need a permit from us. You simply can go in and pull those things out of the watercourse, and we just ask that you move them well away from the watercourse so that they don't return to the watercourse and cause additional problems. Flood-related debris, any garbage that's in the creek, those things can absolutely be removed by hand. We just ask again, if you're going to be in there during flood stage, please be very careful. But realistically, we have a lot of just debris that has been caught up in that vegetation, and you don't need a permit from us to be able to remove those. Also, we ask, and this is critical, that when property owners are out managing, maintaining their vegetation, trimming trees, cutting trees, to please keep all of that vegetation out of the creek. Oftentimes people will actually fall a tree across the creek. Then we get debris backlogged, and then we run into all these flooding issues again. I know it seems like an easy place to put vegetation because it's low-lying and out of the way, but it's also very detrimental for our water courses. So trying to help people understand maybe where best to put that material. Thankfully, in your county, I think you actually can do burn piles and things of that nature or chip it. So that's very helpful. Next slide, please. Flood issues. As you are well aware, flooding was statewide this year. So when debris or vegetation becomes stuck within the creek and it causes flooding and it causes that creek to leave its channel, that is an immediate damage to property or a loss of access. Those types of issues, even when we have a culvert that is now in disrepair, needs to be removed immediately, a retaining wall that's failed, and we've got water everywhere, those are considered emergencies. That work can actually begin immediately. If you need to go in and do stabilization, if you need to pull some material out so that that water can maintain its flow. In this instance, equipment is okay to use, but you do still need to notify the department. It is called a 1610. It's an emergency notification. You can begin work immediately, but you must notify us within 14 days of beginning that work. This is typically for temporary flooding issues or emergencies, not necessarily a long-term or planned or engineered type of structure. This is also where we ask to consult us by all means. Let us know if you're having issues. Let us know how we can assist, and also potentially to walk you through that emergency notification process so you can get things done. Next slide, please. My closing thoughts. I realize that we are all trying as best we can to improve our habitat, improve the clarity of our water, keep our water courses in good health. I would love to see our communities come together, our agencies work together to continue to maintain the work that the CCCs have now implemented and kind of started for us. And that, I think, is all of us working together to find those funding resources, whether they be grants, working with other entities and agencies, working with our tribal communities, our partners, our ag community. There's so much that we can actually do. We just have to collectively, logistically get together and do it. So we are committed as a department to trying to get funding for all activities that we can that improve kind of the health and well-being of the watershed here in Clear Lake. If you would like more information on the Lake and Streambed Alteration Agreement Program, there's a link there. There's also a link to an email which goes right to our region. So if any member of the community or yourself has a question, send it our way. And if we don't know the answer, we'll find someone who does. Felipe and I aren't the fisheries biologists necessarily on the ground in the lake doing all of the survey work and whatnot, but there's a lot of science and there's a lot of good data. And we're trying to make that a big part of what we do so that we get the most done on the ground, especially before our next winter season. Yeah.
And then before we open it up, Mitchell, if you can go to the last slide, please. Yeah. This is the information here for the town hall. This was a lot of fun information, and we know that there's a lot of information that we passed around. So please feel free to join us. We have a town hall that will be coming up next week here in the board chambers, 5:30 to 7 p.m. We're going to have, again, experts from CDFW here. We're going to talk about the permitting process. If you have additional questions, if you have concerns, if you have an area that you want to get in your property in the creek and clear some of this vegetation, we'll have the expertise here to help you. So we want to open it up. Please come see us. We will have staff here in person. But yeah, next Wednesday, October 11th, 5:30 to 7 p.m. here in the board chambers. We'll have a follow-up on this discussion. It will be an open session, so come and go as you please. Until 7 p.m. But with that, I want to thank CDFW for making the drive down here from Sacramento, and I want to thank the board for bringing this item forward and your support. So with that, we'll go ahead and open it up for any questions that the board may have, and then the members of the public.
Great. Well, thank you so much for bringing this item, and I'm glad we got to hear it today instead of pushing it to next week. And Jennifer and Felipe, I have so much gratitude for you both for moving so quickly. It feels like it was only a couple weeks ago that we were talking about this, and you already had things moving. And there are a lot of property owners that are in my district that have been experiencing flooding and have been emailing me a lot. And I'm so just grateful that you were able to connect with them and get these resources in place, and then explain to here for us what people can do on their own with or without a permit.
Right.
So thank you so much. Supervisor Spatier.
Thank you for the presentation, all the work that you're doing out there. There's unfortunately a whole lot more work to be done, but it's nice to see what's already happening. There was one part in the presentation, and this is more of an internal discussion, but I disagree with that. Yes, it's nice when you can get the ROEs, but if you're creating a danger to the community by not cleaning, because it's your property. I used to have a stream going through my property. I had to cut down all my neighbors' blackberry bushes because it would flood in my property. If you don't take responsibility for your property, isn't that a nuisance that you are creating for your community? And shouldn't we, through code enforcement or through other means, be able to go after those property owners where an ROE is not accessible, that there are other means to get on that property to get these projects done so we don't get stalled?
So I'm just wondering if we have Director Turner on, because we have had these conversations with code enforcement, if she's available to answer that question. Because we have actually gone out with water resources and code enforcement to a lot of these areas, or maybe Marina can answer.
I'm hoping Director Turner is on, but that is something that has come up, as Chair Pyska has said, it is a nuisance. And, as CDFW said, it takes the right of entries to access these properties, especially in a large-scale effort with the state's involvement and assistance. In terms of that internal discussion, we've had that discussion, but it's never been verified on the path to address that. But definitely would need the assistance of code enforcement to identify those abatements and move forward. Oh, perfect.
There she
Yay.
is. Welcome to the conversation.
I was listening. Yay! Also, I have Marcus coming, and I agree with Marina. It's not the same type of code enforcement action that we're used to. The getting rid of garbage. They're talking about using code enforcement and the code to help clean out the creeks.
Okay.
And how it's been a challenge historically as we've tried it.
It's like a whole big thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Amongst a number of them, they had a bunch of cleanups already. So that's what we were talking about today. So anyway, sorry, I don't have something more specific. We have looked at a number of different options to use code enforcement actions on helping to clean those creeks, but we have had issues specifically that they're on private property and we don't have access, or the funds that we would use could be possibly a gift of public funds. So there have been a number of obstacles, and so we've been real excited to participate with the Fish and Wildlife endeavor. And I agree with Chair Pyska. It's just amazing what you guys have accomplished just in the last few weeks. But we would be happy to continue working going forward to find pathways that we could do it through normal code abatement processes. It could require an amendment of our Chapter 5. No, Chapter 13.
So again, I'm going to disagree. I see us doing that with our the obstacles in the lake from the North Shore area that have been cleaned out by water resources. We're going after those individuals, saying, please get rid of your dilapidated docks. I just think either we don't have the code and we need to create it, but we should have the ability to enforce a rule of you're going to endanger your community and help flood. I think the ROE is amazing if we can get that, but if we can't, we have to either use the avenue or create the avenue, because to me, it's obvious that we should have that capability as a local government to enforce safety. It's a public safety issue when it comes to flooding, and granted, the fish benefit from it at the same time. But I just think that's an avenue that I would like to see either looked into, that it's available, or create if it's not available. Because when you mentioned that part, I was like, that's we have to have a possibility out there. And then the second part is just a question. You were talking about obstacles. It's a little off topic, but it's similar. I know that I've cleaned up the lake many a times in my neighborhood. There are so many tires, and I'm seeing more and more articles about the chemicals used on tires where rubber dries up and cracks, so they had to find a special chemical to keep rubber malleable on your tires. That chemical is being found to be quite a fish-killing machine. And we have tires inside the lake, on the piers, on the docks. How do we go about do we have to go through a permitting process to personally remove those ourselves? Because some of them seem pretty deeply embedded, like you would be disturbing potentially. Do you know what the impact is? What the impact is? I know that it's a huge impact on the salmon, because that's usually the stories that I read, but I'm not sure if it's the similar impact on our lake to our native fish.
I don't have the science on that, but I could only agree that anytime you have something like a tire in any water course, it's never going to be beneficial for habitat or anything else. Most times you can easily, hopefully, remove that tire either by hand or even trying to maybe tie a rope or something and pull it out. And for items like that, you wouldn't need to contact us. If it really truly, or there's so many that they are really sunk in and deep down, I would recommend calling us so that we can actually go and take a look at it and get a game plan. Oftentimes we can move through a project without needing to do any really extensive permitting. Additionally, the county does have a routine maintenance agreement, which is lake and stream bed alteration agreement for routine maintenance activities. Things like that would very much, I think, fall within their existing agreement. So I think simply working with the county, even if it's to obtain some grant funds, because I think there's quite a bit of money expended on throwing those tires away as well. But I think that activity would probably be fairly well covered under their existing agreement.
My kids and I found 11 tires last year during coastal cleanup in Kelsey Creek.
Horrible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And people say, I hope it's not true, but there's so many tires, maybe it is, that it was supposed to be fish habitat.
Oh, jeez.
No, it was. But
Horrible.
yeah, but there's also just the dump. I mean, we found a dump site. Sure, that's what that was. Supervisor Green.
Thank you very much for the presentation, and thank you for your agency's hard work on this and other aspects of the Hitch recovery. I'm going to sound confused in this question, if only because it's kind of a confusing subject. So to the extent that we talk about channel clearing and brush clearing in my district, which includes Scotts Creek, the interest is there in the community, but it ain't for the fish. It's for the potential for flooding or some understanding that these are so overgrown that this represents a major flooding risk. And I've been getting educated along the way about that balance between expenditure of public funds and what's available to clear up some problems in our public trust areas, right? Our navigable waters and stuff like that. I'm still not there yet. I'm still learning this stuff. But it sounds like you have identified some funding, and it sounds like Caltrans may have some funding too for some type of stream restoration and all that. But I don't hear a programmatic approach to this, number one. And in slogging through this in my district, part of it was what is permissible, for use of public funds? How sustainable is this? And are we doing chunk by chunk, property by property, or if we're to scope a larger, more complicated project, how do we do the bang for the buck analysis, knowing that all this stuff is going to grow back? Go into the flooding question again is, that would be great if we keep shade on the stream, but I'm thinking that the majority of people would be more interested in more aggressive trimming for fire safety and flood risk. If they're going to clear it all, they're going to want in there and maybe not necessarily leave a lot of riparian cover on the banks. So it's a little bit of mixed messaging, and the county, I think, has contributed to some of that mixed messaging because Depending on which decade you're talking about and who was driving tractors at the time, the county itself occasionally did some stream channel maintenance too. So, and the only reason I'm doing that is this is like such a heavy lift, but it is kind of pocket by pocket by pocket. So where do we arrive at the end of the day of a sustainable program so we can identify all the state and federal monies that might be applicable? If there's any local cost share, we can get programmatic on that. But that's just for vegetation clearing. And my question is probably the things you haven't been focused on, because you can do what you can do. There are more systemic obstacles involving mining and what have you, and culverts and bridges and all that sort of stuff that also needs to be looked at long term. And that's going to be even more expensive discussion and require even more complexity in the program level than it is with stream clearing. So I really want to applaud the effort here, but I'm trying to get better understanding just so I don't do misinformation and say, no, we can't do this, it's public funds, we can't do it. But not also say, oh, we got all the money we want, just drop a dime, and an LSA on you guys and it's off to the races. So I think we're at the very start of what we need to do in terms of vegetation management. But there's, again, the mining obstructions in the streams. There's huge berms of sediment deposits at the mouths of the tributary that are substantial obstacles as well. So I love this little slice of the problem as it presents, but can you speak just very briefly to the larger issue of the obstacles you've observed? And if only because we still have Director Turner there, we don't have a good understanding of our Hitch habitat. So if we're taking a look at land use projects and we want to review what's going on, it may have been conventional wisdom for years and years that the Bell Hill Road crossing was as far as the Hitch got, but we blew up that understanding this spring. So what type of mapping and analyzing of these projects are you doing to prioritize them?
You want to take that? Yeah.
So I think the big change recently is largely cultural. In like the culture of our agencies, in which we've kind of gotten to this point where we tend to work in silos. And what this task force, the Clear Lake Hitch Task Force, has really done is kind of knock down those walls where we're having like much more open dialogue on what we can do, on sharing of resources. We pull all of our information on these are the funding sources available. How do we prioritize? And it's really a collaborative effort. And so it's not a formal, like structural, programmatic, this is a plan. It's a shift in the culture in our approach. And that's kind of a very general, just, answer to you. We are looking specifically at some large barriers, working with the county, working with DWR, Army Corps of Engineers, to really address some of these bigger issues also. As far as the riparian habitat, as far as people being eager to be more aggressive in brush clearing, that's not really something I can speak to. Again, it speaks to the culture, of the people surrounding, of the property owners. So we can't go in and tell people what to do with their property, but we can educate people on how they can maintain, that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And if we can develop and help build that culture of people maintaining the stream beds, having a healthy ecosystem, and keeping this communication in a more open and transparent way, that in the long run is our aim. And how we'll conserve the Hitch and reap the ancillary benefits of, flood control, of carbon sequestration.
Okay. I will open it up for public comment. Do we have anyone in the chambers who wishes to speak on this item?
Hi, Elaine Brown, educator. Wow, that's a lot of work. I know pulling out vegetation and so you're dealing with landowners on waterways. Are you able to talk to them about like herbicides and pesticides? And some people don't weed eat anymore. They just spray something so that runs into those areas and then it comes into that. And I know herbicides can really affect small animals and that sort of thing. So are you able to do that, with whom you're talking with?
You are.
Good.
Yes, yeah, we are. And obviously, we can't, sorry, we're not able to tell people what they can and can't do, by all means, but we absolutely recommend, if you're going to use an herbicide treatment, please do it when there's no water present.
All right.
But people do ask, and a number of people are definitely concerned with our small mammal and rodent population, which is good, as well as our large animals and our deer moving through. So we have talked about masticating instead, but again, all of these efforts require repeated maintenance. And so it's that commitment from the landowner to do that repeated maintenance through the years.
Great, thank you.
Okay, anyone else?
Hi, I'm John Laboito. I'm a property owner in Upper Lake, and I had a question about a specific barrier. On Middle Creek, underneath the Rancheria Road Bridge, there is an old weir. It's 2 to 3 feet tall. Some years I've looked over the bridge. I see the hitch milling around in the pool below the weir. But it doesn't look to me like they can get past that. Maybe at higher flows if it's washed out. But I guess it changes from year to year. And I just was wondering if that one's on your list.
I think it is on our list. And I think because it's actually infrastructure, it's one of those that requires us to do a little bit more intense planning for it instead of just pulling it out. But I'm pretty sure that I have heard that it's on our list. And if it's not, it is now.
Okay, I don't know how it got there to begin with. I haven't been around here long enough.
Yeah.
I have a suspicion that somebody thought by keep maintaining the water level, it would
Yeah.
recharge the local ag wells.
Yeah.
But
We've
maybe-
seen that quite a bit, so I think you're not alone. And there's a number of, rock weirs that have been built that you can't actually see until you've removed some of the vegetation as well.
Yeah.
So I appreciate the heads up.
All right, that's the one.
Before you go, could you repeat the description of the location just so we can make sure that we have
Okay.
that on our list?
It's on Middle Creek. It is just under and downstream of the Rancheria Road Bridge.
Okay. Thank you for that. And we really appreciate you bringing this to our attention and encourage, if you find other barriers like this, by all means, email the r2info@wildlife.ca.gov. And we really count on the public to help us keep us informed. So thank you for that.
All right.
Thank you. Anyone else? Anyone in the Zoom room? No? Okay. Well, Joan, come on up if you have a comment.
Joan Moss. I haven't met you. I'm sorry. I was late. I do have this to give you. And this is an article I submitted to the Record B, and I will send it to anyone who wants. This is the grand jury report, this year's grand jury report about the effect on the hitch of the water. Over the last 6 years, the number of hitch has declined significantly, and now many local agencies consider it to be an endangered species. Recently, an emergency was declared by the Board of Supervisors regarding the status of the hitch. Part of the reasons for the decline of the hitch is the pollution of the waters of Clear Lake from the chemicals such as cyanotoxins. These chemicals, commonly referred to as the blue-green algae, contain methylmercury, I believe, are particularly harmful to adults, children, animals, and fish. Runoffs from agricultural properties and cannabis farms contain insecticides and fertilizers. These are meant to control insects but affect the health of crops, the hitch, and the lake. And I have another article from the past that I found.
So let's
All
keep
the
our
froth
comments just to the presentation today. Thank you. Maria? You had your hand up? Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. In the side conversation I've had with our code enforcement manager, we have encountered some obstacles within our own code. So if it's the will of the board, we'd be happy to take the next few weeks to take a look at other jurisdictions' codes to see if there's any way that we can improve ours in order to gain access, encourage maintenance, but also move forward with abatements. We'd be happy to bring the board an update on this, like maybe in a month. I know time is really of the essence.
Yes, so yeah, you have consensus on that.
Yes.
Thank you so much. All right.
Thanks.
Supervisor Green. Oh, I'm officially closing public comment. Supervisor Green.
Thank you. So I'm sorry, I should have asked earlier, just general ballpark figure, you must have some portion of that $1 million CDFW through into the Hitch response, or are you using other funding sources right now?
So there was $1 million awarded to the State Water Resources Control Board. A portion of that is going towards a facilitator to help engage with the agricultural community. They are doing some hydraulic modeling efforts and also purchasing stream monitoring equipment. So that was from a news release, I believe, some months ago. So there is that funding. We had a $500,000 pot of money from Emergency Drought Fund that we awarded to the tribes to assist with nearshore monitoring research, hydraulic monitoring and modeling, and the carp eradication and management, the carp management program, which would affect predation on Clear Lake Hitch eggs. And then there are a number of other grant proposals going through, and there are various pots of money that we can also, either the county can apply for, the tribes can apply for, or other organizations. So what's really been the bottleneck hasn't been the funds, is really the staff time to process and manage these grants. So there's a fair amount of money, both federal and state, that we can tap into. And I encourage, if you know of organizations or if the county, if one of the local agencies would has a project in mind, reach out to either me, or we have our Watershed Restorations Grants Program has a generic email where we can initiate a consultation and find the right pot of money to apply for.
And lastly, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but I do want to correct any misinformation when it's brought to this body. Agricultural runoff, whether from traditional ag or cannabis ag. We have an irrigated lands regulatory program that covers our traditional ag producers. We have cannabis waste discharge permits from the state water boards that apply to cannabis. I'm not personally aware of any massive problem involving runoff from either traditional farms or cannabis farms. And I'm open to the idea that we would learn of that quickly and take corrective actions should that occur. That said, we frequently do get people making statements about the level of toxicity of the waters in Clear Lake and how they may affect fish reproduction. So to the extent you can, you're not here to talk about it today, but is there some level of monitoring of the waters at Clear Lake for those things that may be injurious to health for fish?
Yes, and Sarah Ryan at Big Valley Rancheria has been very effective at moving along the cyanotoxin monitoring. So that's online. The Bureau, USGS, the United States Geological Survey, is also working on monitoring for nutrient input. And so that's the sort of information that's shared in the Blue Ribbon Committee, which is another public forum which focuses more on water quality. And I would encourage any members of the public to look into the Blue Ribbon Committee, start attending those meetings. They have quarterly meetings. And then there is a technical subcommittee that gets more into the nitty-gritty of the water quality, various nutrient inputs, cyanotoxin levels, and that sort of monitoring.
And then just to go off of that, our department does monthly monitoring on Clear Lake for water quality. We actually have staff members out there now today doing water quality monitoring. So if you have any questions or comments, just give my department a call at 707-263-2344. We have very dedicated staff. They know their stuff, and they've also released some published articles as well regarding the water quality of Clear Lake. So
And last question. So you raised Blue Ribbon, love it, but we just went through the ranking process. So there, depending on what pool of money you're going after, you can talk about lake health generally, which Blue Ribbon does, and it does talk about cyanobacteria. Is there a need for a metric where we can measure a project
Okay, so I just.
for Hitch
We're getting
beneficial?
really off topic here. I need to stay on topic, which is this presentation for today. So I only need all comments to be in line with what our agenda item is. Did you want to add something else?
I did. I don't have my pen, so I hope you would see my pear.
Oh, I was wondering
lost
what your
my-
pair was
No,
for.
Bruno gave it to me, but I don't have my pen. I was going to talk earlier. We did have a discussion before we started about some barrier challenges that we have, and honestly, go back a couple years. We've been in Upper Lake. I'll say we've been really having a lot of attention on the Middle Creek and Clover Creek channels and whatnot. One of the presentations that was made at the Blue Ribbon Committee at one time was the Clover Creek Channel because of the foliage in that the blackberry bushes. So fast forward, we're at it again, and then there's been a lot of meetings in Upper Lake at the town hall discussing the potential of flooding. But one of my biggest attempts to try and converge both was the Hitch situation. We do know that that's the problem in all the tributaries is the foliage and the vegetation and the sediment. But of course, as you can see in the presentation, the sediment, you can't really mess with that without the permits and all of that. And so that's also another challenge too, because we kind of get in these heated discussions in Upper Lake, and some folks will be there giving their intake on or their expertise, if you will, on what they know about what can take place. And this really helps kind of clear some of that up. Now we can refer some of these folks to this rather than depending on someone in the stands or in the audience saying that they do this all the time and X, Y, and Z. And for me, knowing too that you can just remove this as long as it's foreign to the tributary or if you're just taking down, vegetation. The other thing that was always mentioned in these meetings, and I wanted to ask earlier, was people asked about using goats or something like that in the creeks or anything, and I just want to hear what the take is on that, or if there's a specific permit or something like that.
There is not a specific permit for such an activity. We definitely have had folks use goats when the creeks have been dry, and they typically are an animal that don't pull vegetation completely out by the roots. So I think there are maybe some livestock that would be better suited for that use than others.
Right.
I am unaware of whether we've actually permitted it or not. So that is a great question, but I can definitely get back to
I
you.
just wanted to make sure to say it in public, and then not to mention, we did talk also beforehand about the prescribed burning possibly, or having a group do that.
Yep.
And that's a possibility as well.
Absolutely.
And because I also spoke with NRCS about this, somewhat of the tributaries as well, but they were more interested in the private, meeting with the private owners and doing it. They said that working with the county would be a lot more difficult than it would be with the private owners. And so it kind of stopped there because, as Marina knows, we've been dealing with this in Upper Lake, talking about it for a long time, and it's a very big situation. So I'm glad that this is here. I really am. Thanks.
Thanks.
Yeah, just one final comment. I'm glad to hear that the cultural burning and the burning opportunities, because when we talk about just even with the CCC group, there's 2 and they're scheduled for years. So looking at maintenance and opportunities using fire, I think is really important. Mother Nature does it every time we've had a large fire. It has burned some of our communities because it burned through the creek, around the town, and back up through. So getting that vegetation out, I think, is very important. That's the most cost-effective way to do it, as we move through the process. So Lake PBA, our Prescribed Burn Association, Terra, Clerk, all these other organizations, I think once we get it cleared, that's a real way to move forward, looking at these opportunities, and that's a natural way to go about things. So I'm glad that conversation's happening, hopefully through all agencies, at the state level.
Yeah, and I just would like to add there's an excellent example of prescribed burn on the other side of the state at the Big Chico Creek Ecological Preserve, where they have been doing prescribed burns along with intensive vegetation management, because you get this big dense pile of vegetation, you burn it, and that's not good. So they do the initial vegetation clearing and then have a maintenance schedule of prescribed burning and have gotten very good at it. So there are some very successful results in which their little tributaries to Big Chico Creek are retaining water longer because they're being managed with this prescribed cultural burning.
Yeah, and that is the misconception, for years, people piling up big fires. That hurts the earth. It needs to burn in its natural form. That's why you don't pile it up. That's why you don't scrape it into big things, because then you scorch the earth. That's not what you're supposed to do. But obviously, people have been trained for years like that. So going through that process, I'm glad to hear that conversation's happened, EJ. I'm glad you asked that question, because we all have this in our communities, even though our Middletown, the District 1 area, Anderson Springs, St. Helena Creek, all of those, are just overgrown with everything right now. Hidden Valley, a large community in South County, floods every year, and that's because of all the vegetation that you have in Pewter Creek that's not being addressed. So, and it allows us, where we're not addressing the sediment and the other stuff, but it allows us to let that water flow freely so we don't have flooding communities. So I know we're all dealing with it, no matter where we're at in Lake County.
Well, thank you so much for this presentation today. Really appreciate you making the trip here, moving quickly, using the available funds and the available team. And I just really look forward to more updates. All right. Well, thank you so much.
One last message just for the community. We all have advisory committees, other things. The first process has gone through. Great to see that 18 of the 38. But hopefully that messaging in the meeting today can say we're all in this together. We're not asking to come on your property to tell you what to do at this point. Let's all work together and work to get it done. We just continue that messaging throughout the county, through all of our advisory committees, and really have the conversation. So appreciate the information today. So one more time to get it out to the communities of, we're just trying to get our creeks healthy for everybody's benefit.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much, board.